this idea of example being power. I want to begin by looking at the importance of an example. My first bullet up there is that we are creatures of imitation. In other words, we see something that's being done, and then if we like it, we want to emulate that. Matter of fact, we even have age-old sayings or cliches that like father, like son. You know, the idea of the young man growing up to be like to emulate his father, his role model, if you will. Often professional sports players and stuff are role models that you see young children trying to emulate, whether they're playing baseball in the backyard or at school or whatever it may be. Often they want to, who they look up to as their hero is who they want to emulate. Then I also have here that this helps explain why examples are important in life, and that's something I think if we take away from this lesson is that being the proper example is very important, because we never really know who we're going to be influencing or who we might be a hero to. You just, again, you never know how you might be able to influence somebody who is out and around or within your realm of influence. So this is what we're going to be looking at, as well as that's why there's such an importance on being the proper example. I have here that the power of example is great, and I think that's true, and I think we underestimate it quite a bit. It is one of the greatest powers known to man. If you think, as a bad example, we have Adolf Hitler. Just think of how his influence caused the murder of millions of Jews during World War II. Also caused his actions sparked the Great War, World War II, and he even, if you study history or whatnot, because of his actions, that's why Japan came into it. Mussolini, all those were sparked or fueled from the influence of the German war machine, if you will, and so I think we can clearly see that it is one of the greatest powers known to man, and that's the being an example to somebody. It is a power that all possess, a force all must handle, and I think that's again. I think we often think that, well, I'm not that influential type of person. I have a small circle, and therefore, I don't have to really watch what I'm doing because I'm not around that many people. And I think if that's the mindset that we have, then we're completely underestimating the power of example. And when I was in the Air Force, we often talked about there was two types of power, and one was positional power. Positional power is like the position that you have within an organization, i.e., like here, the elders, they have positional power over the rest of the members of the local church. Ron owns a business, so his business at work, he has positional power over all those that work underneath him. Same way with you working in a family. Often within the family unit, the parents have positional power over the children of the house. And often within the family construct, the matriarch and a patriarch have positional power over the rest of the family, that the rest of the family will look to those for guidance. And then there's what we would call influential power or personal power. This is the power that I'm speaking of. This is the great important, this is the power. And this also often people who study leadership say this is the hardest power to obtain, is having a personal power or able to influence people through your mannerism, through your, what will we call it, your personality, your charisma, those type of things have an influence over individuals, and that's where I'm mainly coming from. Sure, we may have positional power, and that's, like I say, positional power is usually given to you, but the true power is that power of being able to influence those, with or without positional power. And that's the true power, and that's the power that we're talking about here this morning. So the Bible recognizes the great power of example also for good and for evil. And we can actually go to the scriptures and look at some examples to drive home just how important example is. For instance, Noah is a great example of an individual who's godly, and while he may not have been able to influence his generation, he had influence over his family, and obviously through his influence, he was able to preserve mankind because God came to him. Of course, we know commissioned him to build the ark, and even during the 100 and some years of building that ark, he preached continually the importance of being God-fearing. Again, he didn't have much influence over those in the world due to their wickedness and their debauchery, but yet his lineage was preserved, and he was able to preserve mankind. So Moses is definitely an example of how one should be godly or God-fearing. Over in Hebrews chapter 11, plus with Mike's Bible study, we've been talking about how Abraham was a father of faith, or a great example of faith, that he took his son upon the altar, never questioned God whatsoever, and was willing to sacrifice his son because God told him. Because he had faith, he recognized that God had the power to resurrect the dead. And I don't know if many of us, if we was put in that same position, if we would answer that same call just as much as Abraham did. But thankfully, we'll never be put into that position. But again, we can look to him as a great example of faith. Job, when we read about Job and the things that Job went through, we find that he's a great example of patience, of what it is to endure things. And as you read the book of Job, we find out that all the things that were happened to Job, he never once blamed God, or he never once denounced God. And definitely a great example for us, and to show that we need to have patience in our lives as well. Daniel was, as well as Meshach and Abednego, are great examples of what it is to have courage. They were told that they could not worship any other gods than the Babylonian gods, which they said, or had to worship the king Nebuchadnezzar, and they never once hesitated not to worship those, that they worship Jehovah, and they are a great example unto us as well as to their generation. And then Moses, when we look over in Hebrews chapter 11, we find that Moses is an example of endurance. And I'll just go ahead and read this one. It says, By faith Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction for the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. esteemed the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. So again, he endured all that affliction that Pharaoh had put upon him because unto Jehovah God. And so he is an example to us as well. Joshua was a great example of somebody who showed great, he had positional power as well as influential power, personal power, and he is a great example of leadership. Call your attentions over there to Joshua chapter 24, and there's a typo in your handout. I think it says Judges 24, and there is 24 chapters in the Bible in the book of Judges, but nonetheless, call your attention to Joshua 24:31. It says, Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had known all the works of the Lord which he had done for Israel. So, I always think it's interesting. We're shown how all the patriarchs, how they all committed sins or whatnot. And it's obvious that Joshua, being a man, he sinned, but none of it's recorded. So that leads me to believe that Joshua never made any great, huge mistakes. I'm sure he made mistakes, and he, like I say, all men sin and fall short of the glory of God. That is true, but none of that's recorded in Joshua. And we see how successful of a leader that Joshua was. And he was so successful in his leadership, and also obviously in his personal power. It says that all the elders who outlived Joshua the people served or worshiped God under him. So obviously he was able to influence the preceding generation that was around him to follow God in a very godly fashion. It wasn't until later on that we see that things begin to digress. So that again, that leads me to believe that Joshua perhaps is the epitome of what it is to be a good leader, based upon the success that Israel had under his tutelage. And then we can find examples of evil in the Scripture. Again, there just as much as we have good examples, we can find bad examples, that we learn not to emulate. And I think that brings about a good point, that irregardless of our interactions with people, there's always teaching moments, whether they're good or bad. We just have to look to them to see what we want to emulate. And I remember coming up through the ranks in the Air Force, one of my supervisors, that's what his, he said it was passed on to him. One of his supervisors told him, he said, whenever you go into a work environment, he said, you want to look around and find somebody, a leader, and evaluate their qualities and say, those are qualities that I want to emulate. And then he also said you want to look around and see the qualities which are bad qualities, and also note those and say, I don't want to repeat those type of mistakes in my leadership style. So, and I think that's very good advice. So as we go throughout our life cycle, we are constantly evolving as leaders, whether you believe it or not. And that's one of the best ways to develop your leadership, is to look to see how others are successful, and you want to repeat those good behaviors, and then also learn from the mistakes of others, and say that I don't want to emulate that type of leadership style. And obviously, these individuals had bad leadership styles. Consider the 10 spies. Their influence was able to influence the entire nation to where they didn't want to go into the promised land. If you recall, there was only two. One of them was Joshua, that said that we can go in there because God's on our side. But the other ones feared and trembled and said, "Oh no, there's just no way that we can do this." And because of that, an entire generation was lost in the wilderness due to the influence of those 10 individuals. And then we got the example of Korah. Again, this is under the time of Moses in the wilderness. But this individual looked around and said, "You know what? You and Aaron take too much upon your shoulders. Why are you guys the ones who do everything?" In other words, Korah wanted to share in this positional power. He wanted to expand his influence from a positional standpoint. And that's what I gather from the scriptures. I don't gather that he wanted to use, obviously he used his personal power too, because as we read here, and if you read number 16, he was able to allure 250 other patriarchs to follow him in rebellion against Moses and Aaron. I'm sorry, drawn a blank right there. They eventually, God said, have all these leaders come and bring a rod with them, and then whichever one buds or sprouts, those will be the leaders. And of course, it was Aaron's rod who budded and sprouted and brought about almonds. Again, a miracle, if you will. But because of this, these 250 men, as well as Korah, the ground opened up and swallowed them up, as well as 14,700 others who followed them. And so these men were examples of, or shows how people can misuse their personal as well as their positional power to influence others. So as you can see, nearly 15,000 men and women lost their lives due to this uprising, and it all began with one individual. King Saul, if you read First Samuel is about King Saul. And he was an individual who started out an individual with a lot of personal power. He was a man of great stature, and he was a God-fearing man, and he started out as a very humble leader. But as things progressed along, I think he became corrupted from the positional power that he was given. And along the way, he made a mistake that he was told to go out and annihilate this entire tribe of people, and he didn't listen to what he was told to do, because he allowed the king to live, and then he also kept all the spoils as far as the livestock and the things that he was told to destroy. So that caused him to lose his positional power. However, that didn't sit well with Saul. Even though God told him that David was going to be king, he wouldn't have any of that. So then he continued to use his positional power, and he tried to kill David. And as we see, he just went further and further and further into depravity. And so here's a great example of an individual who misused his power, that started out very good but became very corrupt. And then we also see that the Pharisees during the time of Christ, I think these individuals are a great example of people that we need not to be. Call your attention there to Matthew chapter 23, verses 1 through 3. It says, "Then Jesus spoke to the multitudes and to his disciples, saying, The scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Therefore, whatever they do, you too observe. That observe and do, but do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. And so here was these individuals, they had positional power, and they were using their positional power to mandate that people do certain things in the name of the Lord. But when it came to them themselves, they weren't doing. It was one of those. We also have a cliche for that: "Do as I say, not as I do" type thing. And so those individuals, and here these individuals that also go out and make a spectacle of their prayers, stand there and act like they were holier than thou, and and Christ said, well, basically, I'm paraphrasing, but that's a wonderful prayer that you gave, and your just reward is you've received it already. In other words, there's nothing else to be gained from that prayer because you used it to perpetuate yourself as somebody who's greater or better than everybody else around you. So these individuals were corrupted from in their positional power, and they're an example of what we need not to be. I have up here, it has been said that precepts tell us our duty, and examples show us that it is possible. And that's when we read the scriptures, because most of the scriptures, as we know, is really an account of people living out those precepts. So they are left as examples unto us. Matter of fact, many examples are given to us. The Old Testament is said to, we can even actually read over there, look with me over in Romans chapter 15, verse 4, it says, "For whatever things were written before were written for our learning, that we through the patience and comfort of the scriptures might have hope." So again, the accounts that are given there, I don't like using the word stories because it sounds like that it was made up. So I often try to use the word the accounts, because I believe, being the inspired word of God, that those are recorded history or recorded events that truly happened. And so the Old Testament, as well the New Testament for our age, is given to us as an examples of either what to do or what not to do. And Christ is even said to be an example for us. Matter of fact, we could even say he's the perfect example. And that's exactly what Philippians chapter 2, verse 1 through 11, is that Christ is our example for humility, how we should try to emulate him for humility. And also there in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 21, Peter records there, says, "For to this you were called, because Christ who suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow in his steps." And so Christ was given to us as an example of somebody who we need to try to emulate. Paul understood this very, very, very much so. And matter of fact, he incorporated that into his teaching style. And he was aware of his own example. Consider 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 1. It says, "Imitate me just as I also imitate Christ." And so Paul often said, and those who traveled with Paul, he would often say, we left ourselves as an example unto you how you need to live. In other words, how you need to be. This is how you live a proper Christian life. And he commanded others to set a proper example as well. Consider 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12, where it says, "Let no one despise your youth, but be an example to the believers in word, in conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, and in purity. And that's what he told Timothy. Be an example to believers in word, in conduct, in love, spirit, and faith, and purity. So, we mentioned that cliche, do as I say, not as I do. But Paul was telling Timothy, ensure what you do is also what you say, because you are an example to all those that are around you. Just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. So now let's consider Christians are to be examples. We've been talking about how others, we've been talking about the types of power that we can have as being examples. Now let's consider some examples that we need to be. Christians are to be the light of the world. And that's exactly over in the Beatitudes. That's what Christ says. Look over there with me in Matthew chapter 5, beginning at 14. He says, you are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glory your Father in heaven. So that exactly, unfortunately I don't have the eloquence that Christ had, but we have his recorded word. And that's what Christ is saying, is that we are an example. We're like the shining a candlelight at night. And nobody lights a candle to stick it underneath a basket to hide all of its light. No, you put it up on the highest point in the room so that it illuminates the entire room. And that's how we are to be in our leadership styles, and to realize that we are lights, that we are the light unto all the worlds, and how one ought to live and conduct themselves. I have up here, those who claim to be Christians are always influencing people in one way or another. And again, that's very true. And that's true regardless if you're a Christian or not a Christian, but especially that of being a Christian. You do something that is unchristian-like and people know that you're a Christian, they're going to point it out very, very quickly. This is a leadership precept that we might call the fishbowl effect. When you buy that goldfish, when you stick him in the fishbowl, that fish can't hide anywhere, because wherever he goes, he can be seen. And same way as us as Christians, all eyes are on you, and especially those that aren't of the Christian persuasion, those who like to denounce Christianity. They'll use you as an example to say, you know what, there's a hypocrite. That's why I'm not a Christian, is because look at the hypocrisy that those individuals do. And granted, we are going to make mistakes from one time or another, and that's where we have to be. I would encourage you to use that humility that Christ had. When you make a mistake before other people, especially those outside the church, make it a point to tell them that you recognize the mistake that you made and that you're sorry for that. Because if you don't, I guarantee you they will use that, maybe not to your face, but they will use that to others around them to influence them and say, well, I don't want to be like that guy. He's a hypocrite. He did this, but he did that. He says this, but he did that type thing. And so I encourage you, in your leadership style, especially that of being a Christian, if you make a mistake and people know that you made a mistake, use the humility that you're supposed to have and just admit, I made a mistake and I ask for your forgiveness. And that will quail, I believe Christ said, heap coals upon their head. That's exactly what you're doing. You're disarming them from that opportunity to make a mockery of you, because now you've used the proper humility in addressing the situation. Also, here as Christians, we must realize that the world is judging Christianity by us, and that's what we've been talking up to this point. We always need to, and that is so true, so true. And again, like I say, especially, people probably will not use you as to say, I want to be like that guy. Eventually, you run into somebody like that, and they usually become a member of the church. But more than likely, they're going to try to use you as the antithesis of Christianity to say, look at that hypocrite. He did, we've beat that enough. But you know the point. And consider Thomas Jefferson in writing John Adams. This is what Thomas Jefferson said: "I always judge a man's religion by his life, for it is from our lives and not our words that our religion must be read." And how true that is. So, again, if you think that you can go out there and live a lifestyle contrary to the Christian life of what we need to be, and think that nobody's going to think nothing of it, they may not say anything to your face, but I guarantee you are being a bad influence, or people are looking to you to say, yeah, that's something I don't want to be a part of because of this. So always remember the fishbowl effect. Consider 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12 reveals those areas in which Christians are to be example. We read that before, but those areas is conduct, in word, conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, and in purity. So let's look at those. In word, we need to be careful what we say and how we say it. We can speak the truth, but because we said it in an improper fashion, we can become completely ineffective in saying that truth. So again, we need to cloak our words, I would say, always in humility. And we always need to speak, we talk about truth to power. We need to always speak the truth, especially when it comes to our own conduct. We've talked about this morning in Bible study, I believe, that people struggle to, often admit that they made mistakes, and often that can, have adverse effects on those around you when you fail to recognize those mistakes. So be mindful of that. Manner of life. Never forget that people are observing you. Again, that fishbowl effect. You're the goldfish, and there's no hiding from people. Love for God, for Christ, and our fellow man. I call that the three priorities of life. Really, there's four. There's God, Christ, everybody else, and then me. But unfortunately, too many of us, we want to take number 4 and put it up at number 1. Do we not? And we want to live life, I'm not going to lay by a store because I want to buy X, Y, and Z. I don't want to go to Wednesday night Bible study because I want to go, it's bowling league night. Or, whatever that case may be. People recognize that. And we need to have the proper love in our life, and we need to be a sacrifice unto God and realize that there are some things that we're going to have to give up. But if we have the proper love for Him and for Christ and for our fellow man, then we will be the proper example, and we won't live contrary to those things. In spirit, I would say that what's being spoken of is what's your attitude. We're not talking about the Holy Spirit, but we're talking about our spirit as individuals. Are you spirited towards the Lord? Do you show fervor and great? Do you? I know in the military I was always getting in trouble because when I would explain situations or leadership examples trying to help people solve problems, I would quote a verse or use an example in the Bible to say, well, if you recall from the Bible, so-and-so did this. And before I knew it, people were complaining, saying that I was always time quoting the Bible and whatnot. Now, I don't say that for you to, or patting on myself on the back or whatnot. But again, if we're really committed to God and we're really committed to being a Christian, then I think that it's going to show in the spirit of things that we do. Our Christianity is going to just soothe out, and we're going to be using those precepts and those concepts and those accounts in the Bible in our everyday conversations with the rest of the world. Also, faith, whether weak or strong, little or great, you are an example of faith when people know that you're a Christian. So hopefully your faith is going to be strong, and your faith is going to be great. Just as chapter 11 speaks of the great patriarchs of faith, those individuals who are faith. But then all those individuals that we read there in chapter 11, we can go back to their actual accounts and see the opposite of that. Just as Abel was an example of faith, Cain was an example of what faith was not, and so forth. So make sure that you're a proper example of faith. Purity. Do others see your desire to remain unspotted in the world? And this is a very important one. Are you one who lives by those precepts, or are you one who wants to be part of the guys? Are you the one who will go over to the football party and maybe perhaps break open a beer and sip on a beverage of choice? Yeah, you may not get drunk, or you may not behave in what society would consider a bad manner. But are you really leading that life of purity? I would say no, you are not, because you are partaking. You are relishing the things of the world versus the things of the Spirit. And so realize that if you're not keeping yourself pure, you're being a bad example unto those that you come in contact with. So in conclusion, that's the lesson, and I hope that this was a good lesson for you to realize just how important or how powerful your example is to those out and around you, and that you take away the importance of being an example and the power of an example, and then you also know how a Christian is to be an example to those in the world. And always remember, you are the fishbowl effect. So all eyes are on you, and they're looking to see how you behave in relationship to God the Father. So that's the lesson. I hope that it's been of value